Hi there, you're on Office Hours with the Mad Professor. I'm Liam O'Mara, and by an interesting coincidence, I just finished up regular office hours with my classes. Uh, so I had a thought that came out of that discussion that I figured, well, I might as well share here. You see, the class in question is my history of political violence in the 20th century, which is a lovely, super depressing kind of class that walks through all kinds of horrifying things like terrorism and war and genocide and fascism and Stalinism and all this crazy stuff. And the purpose of that is not just to depress my students, because I'm one of those annoying silver linings people who is always trying to find a way to to come back around and to use something, to learn from it, to see, can we avoid making the same mistakes again? How can we improve as people? And if you don't understand what you're doing wrong, you're never going to improve. That's kind of the essence of anything, whether you're talking about in your own life or in society. You have to be able to critically understand the problem. This is one of the reasons that it's really frustrating when people get really defensive about stuff. I'll think about all the debates around, like, oh my god, critical race theory, you're looking at how bad the US has been and problems in our legal system, and that makes me feel bad. I'm like, well, fuck your feelings. It's not really relevant. It's not about you. It's about how we can improve as a society. And if you feel threatened by an improvement like that, then you're probably kind of the problem on some level and should look inside. But it's true of all kinds of personal things as well. I mean, how does anyone improve, solve a problem in their own life? Well, you first have to admit it, right? How many things tell you that? Like, the first step is admitting you have a problem. We've all heard that before. You just think about the way, like, Alcoholics Anonymous and all that stuff works. You have to be able to face that there is a challenge there and look at it and then start planning how you can get out of it. So anyway, the class is looking at political violence in this way. Now, there's a project that I assigned pretty early in the class, and it's before they have a lot of discussions or ability really to deal with a document of this type. It's intended explicitly as a challenge. I give them an essay to read from the 1930s, so very, very different cultural context, and related to film, because we use film in the class to address each of these different issues. So we kind of bounce back and forth between a movie and a lecture, and we try to draw connections between them and see how we can learn through these different mediums. So I take this essay that's talking about the new film industry and, some of the issues with it or problems seen in it. The essay, for anybody who's heard of this, is Walter Benjamin's The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. And I'm essentially taking it out of its own context, out of its own historical moment, where, well, it's just trucks and then planes and just one thing after another today. Nice timing for this, huh? I don't know if you guys can hear that well enough with the microphone or not, but something is flying right overhead, which is rare up here. Anyway, so I'm pulling it out of its own context and bringing it into ours. And that is important because Benjamin is writing as a commie to other commies. And that's kind of not the point of the essay for me. It's not where we're really using it, because you can take it in a number of different ways. And in some ways, in spite of its politics, although it does have a particularly relevant salience, I think, to some of our current challenges here with neo-fascist movements, since he's writing about fascists at the time. Now, one thing that he does, and one of the things that often throws off my students, because what I'm asking them to do is like, tell me what you think is happening here. What do you think he's really arguing? And that's the challenge, to think through this and see if they can tell what he's getting at, because it can be kind of subtle. And then we just have a bigger discussion about it afterwards. So, them writing about it is not, well, they're not getting penalized if they didn't figure it all out, because I kind of take that for granted. What throws people is that he often they'll get stuck on the fact that he's making distinctions in different art types. We could connect this to a lot of similar discussions that make a distinction between, say, high art and high culture, and low art or popular culture. The art for the masses. Popular entertainments. To flash back a century, sort of the distinction between going to the opera or going to a cockfight. Like Angry Roosters. Just really kind of simple, vulgar entertainments. The whole Roman panemit circenses. Like how can we just distract the people with this particular art form? And it's not really the sort of art that's intended to inspire reflection and personal growth. That's very personal and intense. When you're looking at a painting, and you're staring at that painting, and you're thinking about that painting, and you're putting yourself into that painting. What is this? What does this mean to me? What emotions does this draw from me? It's a very active process. And he's going to make a distinction here between the kind of active engagement you get in going to a play, or live performances of various forms, or looking at a work of art, or reading books, versus going to the movies, where there's no imagination involved. It's basically the camera is your eyes, and it points you where it wants you to go. You don't I think I want to look that way and wonder what's over there. No, you can't, because the camera is looking over there, and that's it. It's a much more passive medium, and it's intended to draw you in, which is one of the reasons that for the big blockbuster films, really immersive stuff like explosions and shit work really well, because whoa, you're just like sucked up into it, and you're just there. Or they kind of overwhelm you emotionally in a way, really try to draw out, like the tearjerker sort of films. It has to be powerful because it's intended to suck you in, but not involve a lot of your own thinking. It's drawing you where they want you to go. And the culture industry, which was still in its relative infancy at the time that Benjamin was writing, is making money off of this. It's finding ways to produce something and then aim it at a particular audience and make money off of it, or push a particular idea, whether it's as simple as buy Pepsi or something, different sponsorships or this or that. It always has a kind of purpose to it, and generally a commercial purpose, because these are businesses. And that also is different from the way that, say, high art would work, because that's a very individual response. Your responses to things are going to vary tremendously, but the work of art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, making a movie or something, is aimed at a particular demographic. It's basically, instead of treating your audience members as individuals with individual tastes, you're hitting a block of them with particular tropes that works. Like, if we put in X number of explosions, it will produce X emotional response and bring in more teenage boys, a certain number of teenage boys, and they'll all go to see it and we'll make money. Like, they're boiling it down to a formula to try and make money or move a product. But there are other ways that you can see some significant changes in art at the time to which Benjamin's responding. And one really big one is fascism. And Benjamin notes that fascism essentially aestheticizes politics. It makes politics aesthetic. And this is a point that I make in discussions of fascism and neo-fascism as a political philosophy, because it relies upon spectacle. This is why the fascists love big rallies, with huge numbers of people, or parades, right? Or like symbols, things that you can easily repeat, pithy slogans. You want to say something over and over again so it just sticks, and da-da-da-da, and we can all march in lockstep. And there's a particular imagery associated with it. Certain colors, certain feelings, certain emotions are being drawn out. It's essentially making politics an aesthetic act. So there's an interesting intersection there. And of course, the fascists really embraced film. The Italian fascists from pretty early on in the 20s start cranking out particular types of films intended to push a particular idea. The Italian fascists loved, in particular, these stories set in like the countryside. So this is kind of like rural sensibility, like, you know, good, authentic people of the earth, you know, like, you know, real people. And this is something that the fascists were really, really big into, because at the end of the day, they're kind of reactionaries. They love certain aspects of modernity and hate other aspects of it. So what Benjamin is really arguing in the piece, and all the discussion and the contrast between the high and low arts and whatever here, all that is really preamble to the basic point, which is to say that if this new type of art is easily reproduced and therefore cheap to reach a large audience, you don't all have to go to the museum, we don't all have to be in a particular place and in the theater or whatever. You can reproduce it, beam it into people's houses like today, you know. There's tons of ways to get it out to people. So if it's cheap, right? So you've got that aspect of it. The mechanical reproduction makes a new type of art that is inexpensive. And yes, it contrasts with the very individualistic responses in the older types of art, but it is still a distinct type of art. And if that art type is also going to be exploited by, say, the fascists, who are already busy aestheticizing politics, you know, the Nazis love putting big monuments up, and Hitler had all these grand architectural plans, and there's a vision they have, an art. They're trying to mold society in their own image, and the film can play a part in that too. And it plays a part in that because of its persuasive ability. The same reason the culture industry likes it. Because the same thing that will drive people to buy a particular product because it's on the table in the sitcom you like and the label turned just so you can see it. The same kind of subconscious forces that make that effective also would work in, say, fascist propaganda films. Because you're subtly seeding things into people's heads and getting them thinking about things in a certain way. So when you hit those rhetorical points in your speeches or political ads or whatever, like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Because in the back of your head, it's reminding you of this cool scene in a film. So there's an interesting kind of revolutionary potential for the fascists in film that they see as part of their broader aestheticization of politics. So Benjamin's argument is that, you know, the communist, for him, or really just for people in general, the populist response would be to politicize art, to essentially do the same thing. And that's one of the ways in which this paper really hits on some very contemporary ideas, some very modern ideas. Think about the potential of YouTube. You know, any random nutter sitting in his living room, surrounded by junk because he's in the process of, like, moving stuff from one house to the next and blah, 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 chaos there. So you're just, you've been transported into my living room, and there's this nutty guy sitting around with cats everywhere, you know, doing his thing. And I'm able to talk to you, and we can have a conversation. And there's a potential persuasive element here. I can make an argument that might make sense to you. And you know what? I got to record this in my living room and upload it to the internet, and you're watching it somewhere else in the world. That's kind of remarkable. And it's ultimately what Benjamin is pointing to, this ability for us to make our own art, to include our own perspectives, our own political points, to basically respond to, okay, well, the culture industry has its hundreds of millions of dollars to crank out some particular piece there. Well, I don't have that. But they're bombarding me with something because they've got the money. Or the powerful, you know, oligarchs funding think tanks, or like, obviously, fascist governments, any kind of authoritarian government that's producing direct political propaganda, or hell, even a lot of democratic societies have produced tons of political propaganda. But obviously, they have money, they have power, it has reach. It can hit a lot of people, right? We're familiar with the way that money creates a certain power when we're talking about these things. Well, what about using just how cheap it is to make films and music and whatnot at this point and reach people and use that to encapsulate our own perspectives? If you're watching this on YouTube, you're already familiar with that power. You've already seen it. You've already subscribed to different people. And if you like these things, please like and subscribe and all that business. But you've already seen just that revolutionary potential of YouTube. And again, we can pull this sort of out of its own kind of specific communist v. fascist political context because we don't exactly live in the world of the 1930s anymore. And you can do that with other things as well. I like making a similar point using Antonio Gramsci's contrast between the war of position and the war of maneuver, where he looks at the war of maneuver as the straight-on confrontation with the powerful. So basically like a bunch of revolutionaries grabbing their rifles and taking on the state. And the argument here is, well, that's probably not going to work because they're more powerful than you. And they were more powerful than you 100 years ago. And back then, they didn't have like remote control predator drones to, bomb you wherever you're hiding. So going up against the state, going up against powerful corporations head on, it doesn't work. I can get together with my friends and we can make a Star Trek fan film, but there's no way it's going to be as good as a film that they can dump $100 or $200 million in from a studio. They're going to be able to make a prettier looking film than we can do. You can't compete head to head against the culture industry, big corporations, the state, that sort of thing. But you can, in a way, if you can affect people, if you can win hearts and minds. And that's what Gramsci kind of means by the war of position. And the war of position is basically a cultural struggle, in a sense, a social struggle between ideas, trying to get a different idea out there, getting us to think differently. So, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't be bombing people all the time, but that's just sort of the norm, and everyone's just like, it happens, whatever. But if we all talk about that and we think about it, are there better uses for that money? Maybe if they didn't tax that to bomb somebody, I might have more money because they wouldn't take as much from me. Or maybe they could still take that money, but they could use it in some other productive way that actually helps my life or other people's lives instead of just killing people. That's an idea, right? Well, we can talk about that, and we've been talking about that for a long time. The struggles against the Vietnam War are a long time ago now, right? So why are we still bombing people in like 8 different countries right now? It didn't work. It didn't happen. The hippies who were protesting those wars did not win the war of position. They did not convince enough people that imperialism is bad, militarism is bad. Later in his career, Martin Luther King Jr. was much more emphasizing the economic and political dimensions, the militarism parts. And that didn't really stick. And you saw a significant number of people at the time saying, hey, militarism is bad. And then it just sort of faded away and we got sucked up by other things. So the point here that Gramsci would be making, or that I'm making, is that it simply did not convince enough people to change the course of history. And the purpose, really, of any of this, and one of the reasons that, I'm a historian and people study history in the first place, is really to understand how we got where we are so you can change the future. There's a lot of really fucked up stuff that happens in our past, and you don't study it because, hey, this fucked up thing is really cool. No, it's awful. It's awful. But you don't want to study it just because it's awful either. You want to study it so you can do better, so you can learn from it. Those who refuse the lessons of the past are condemned to repeat its worst mistakes. And we do this over and over and over again. And the only way we're ever going to be able to stop making those mistakes is if we can reach enough people, if we can talk to enough people to get the ideas out there, and in essence win that war of position. And that, again, what these individual authors were talking about isn't as relevant as the idea itself. You can argue for whatever you want. I don't. It's your YouTube channel. I don't care what you do. It's your music. You can make whatever kind of music you want. But the point is to produce it, to get it out there, to start those conversations, and the good ideas will rise to the top. And, whether I might hope that we defeat militarism at some point, that's my perspective, doesn't mean that we will, because ultimately that's up to you. But anyway, that's my little meditation here on the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, and essentially the revolutionary potential of things like YouTube. So I'll sign off here, and once again, I am Liam O'Mara, and this is Office Hours with the Mad Professor, and if you like these little things, go ahead and like, subscribe, follow along, maybe throw me a buck on Patreon. I'll love you for it. All right, have a great day.